Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, President of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and welcome to part 3 of my series, The Evil Within. Just as a review, I'm doing this series to concentrate on the concept of evil within the federal government. As y'all know, as libertarians, we focus most of our attention on the concept of freedom, and we show how government programs have destroyed our freedom, our privacy, our well-being. To a certain extent, we make the utilitarian case for freedom. We show how government programs diminish people's standard of living, create disharmonies among people, and so forth. But I've never, in the 36 years of being here at the Future of Freedom Foundation, I've never concentrated so much on the concept of evil, but I've been giving it so much thought over the past few years that I've decided I'm going to devote a series to it. And it's my contention that certain systems of evil have attached themselves to the federal government or been attached to the federal government, and that this is where evil is concentrated, and that it's possible to eradicate it by dismantling these systems. But the big challenge is that these systems have become so engrafted and interwoven into the machinery of the federal government that it has become extremely difficult to dismantle it. It's like an octopus. It's just got its tentacles everywhere, and it's had decades to do this. And then not to mention the fact that a lot of good people, Christians, support these evil programs, misguidingly, but nonetheless still do. And this is one of the great triumphs of evil. Now, of course, this assumes that one believes in the concept of evil, that there's evil in the world, and I happen to believe that. And so one of the great triumphs of evil is to get good people, devout Christians, for example, to support evil under the mindset that they're supporting good. And there are few better examples of this phenomenon than these evil systems that I'll be focusing on in the course of this series. Now, part 1 was the introduction. Part 2 was the first system, the evil system within the federal government, and that is the national security establishment, or the national security state. As I pointed out in part 2, this is an alien form of governmental structure. It was not part of our original governmental structure. It became engrafted on in the aftermath of World War II, and it totally changed the nature of the federal government. And it is my contention that this is evil that has concentrated itself within this system, and that as long as this system exists, America can never be a good country. It certainly can't ever be a free country, despite the fact that Americans have convinced themselves that they're free under this evil anti-freedom system. But in order to achieve a good society, you got to get rid of evil, at least institutionalized evil. I talked about some of the bad things that the national security state has done. I mean, we could spend hours and hours, and people have, and they've written volumes and volumes on the evil things that the CIA has done, for example. I'd like to just mention a couple, because I think it's important that to focus sometimes on the fruits of a tree, because if the fruits of a tree are rotten, it's almost a virtual certainty that the tree itself is rotten. And if the fruit is evil, it's almost certain that the tree itself is evil. Many of you are familiar with the CIA's MK Ultra program. Now, this can be described no less than just pure evil. I mean, just absolute evil. They were conducting drug experiments on unsuspecting Americans and foreigners as well. And no telling how much damage they did to people's minds. We don't even know if they killed people in the process, but it's likely they did. And with total indifference. I mean, this was like like their experiment to see how people would respond to drugs without knowing that they were taking drugs. And they, when it came uncovered, they destroyed all the records. I mean, like 99.99% of the records, because they did not want the American people to discover what they had done, which really goes to show you how bad it must have really been. Now we've got inklings of the surface of it, drug experiments on unsuspecting Americans, but there is no way to ever know the depths. I don't think they would have destroyed those records if it had just been drug experiments on unsuspecting Americans. I believe that there were some real killings that were taking place here, which they had to cover up with the destruction of the records. But as soon as it came to light that those records were destroyed, I mean, that was the time to dismantle this entire system, the whole system, because it's one great big system, the CIA, the NSA, and the Pentagon, and the vast military-industrial complex, the empire of domestic and foreign military bases and so forth. I mean, when that came to light, but you see, the American people couldn't do that because they were convinced, and had been made to convince, that evil was necessary. They didn't see it as evil. They saw the national security state as something good. And when confronted, like with MK Ultra, it was like, well, boys will be boys. They made a mistake, and let's move on, because people had this concept that this thing was necessary to protect them from the Reds, from the communists, and that was part of what evil had accomplished. It had taken control over people's minds and convinced them that evil was necessary, like a necessary evil. Well, God has not created a universe where evil in government is necessary. And then there was Operation Condor, which the CIA played a role in. This was a top secret international assassination ring in South America, where they were kidnapping people because of their political beliefs, because they said, oh, well, they're socialists or they're communists, and they were kidnapping them and torturing them brutally, and then killing them. I forget how many countries were involved, but the CIA has always tried to cover up its role in that, but it played a role. It appears that, we don't know all the ramifications, because they still won't release all the records, but national security, of course. But it appears that what the CIA's contribution was, they were providing the technology, the computers, and so forth. Well, I guess to keep track of the people they were killing. And these were innocent people. You don't kill somebody because of their beliefs. And so here again, we have this evil fruit that's emanating from this evil tree. And yet, nothing happened afterward. The system stays in place, and the system is there right now. It's grafted on there. I mean, it would appear to be a permanent part of the federal government. Well, it's not permanent. It could be dismantled. All right, so this is part 3. What's the next system I'm going to be talking about? Well, that system is the drug war, or drug criminalization, or the notion that government should have the authority to punish people for ingesting harmful substances that the government says are harmful. This thing, as everyone knows, has just evolved and morphed into this gigantic system of death and destruction. It's phenomenal what they've done. They destroyed the entire country of Mexico with this thing. I mean, that's one of the fruits that you can tell. I don't know exactly how. I don't think anybody knows how many people in Mexico have been killed because of the drug war. Innocent people. But it ranges in the tens of thousands. Now, when tens of thousands of innocent people are being killed because of a government program, that's a pretty powerful sign that this is an evil program. Because it's evil to be killing innocent people. And yet, while great strides have been made for dismantling this program, it's still there. It's just still there. Now, the simplistic support of the drug war is that, drugs are a problem, Jacob. The people are taking drugs, they're abusing drugs. It's altering their mindsets. It's interfering with their work. It's interfering with their lives. It's destroying their families. There's the children that to be concerned about, and that there's nothing wrong with government implementing these laws to suppress this destructive activity. Well, there's a lot wrong with it. From a Christian standpoint, it's horrific. It's horrific, and of course that statement would shock a lot of Christians and devout people. That oh my gosh, Jacob, I mean, it's naturally the Christian position to favor the drug war because it's wrong to be taking these drugs and they're very destructive. Well, actually, it's the exact opposite. It's a classic example again of where Christians misguidedly are supporting evil. Now, here's my reasoning. God has vested people with free will. And that's for people who believe in God, that are Christians or Jews or Muslims or whatever. God has vested us all with free will. This is one of our rights. When we say that, like in the Declaration of Independence, that man has been endowed by his Creator with certain inalienable rights or unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Liberty, from a Christian standpoint, is free will. In other words, when God creates man, he says, I'm going to let you choose your way in life from birth to death. And that's a lot of trust, okay? I mean, he's essentially saying, you're free to do whatever you want to live your life. Now, you're not free to go and initiate violence against another person. Like, you can't go kill another person. That's one of the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not kill. But if it's just peaceful, the choices between right and wrong, morals or immoral, God vested man with total latitude to make those choices. And then he leaves it up to the individual to bear the consequences of those decisions. So if we take, for example, another one of the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not commit adultery. Okay, God says there's the commandment, but you're free to make this choice on your own. And if you engage in this sin, then or this evil, then you're going to just have to bear the consequences. And lots of times there are very adverse consequences when something like that takes place. But there's a lot of latitude of making the wrong decisions. And one of them is with respect to harmful or destructive substances. They're part of life. I mean, tobacco is part of life. Alcohol is part of life. Illicit drugs, marijuana, cocaine, heroin, fentanyl, whatever. It's here. It's all part of life. And under God's system, people have a right to go down this road. In fact, oftentimes it's when somebody reaches the very bottom of the barrel, like with drug addiction, where he's just, his last gasps, that he finds God, that pulls himself out of this darkness, out of this swamp. And that's where organizations like Alcoholics Anonymous or other drug rehab programs come into play. That sometimes that's how a person comes to God, and that's God's system. God lets people have that freedom to make those choices, and then it all plays out the way it's supposed to play out when people make those choices. Some people make some bad choices. They start drinking. But we don't want to criminalize drinking. America tried that. Just the alcohol prohibition is no different from drug prohibition. It's the same principle. That there was a lot of alcoholism in the late 1800s, and so people said, "Oh well, we'll just make it illegal." And of course, we saw the results. The same results we see in the drug war. Gang warfare, the Al Capone stuff, machine gunnings of people, alcohol cartels battling each other for turf, and corruption in the police department, corruption in the judiciary, corruption in the prosecutors. I mean, it was just, it was a horrific thing. But America's got smart. It's really an amazing thing. They actually passed a constitutional amendment that essentially said, we made a mistake here. We're going to leave people free to consume alcohol. They got to bear the consequences. You go out and drink and you cause problems like automobile accident, driving while intoxicated. You're going to bear the consequences of this. But we're not going to be putting people in jail anymore for possession of alcohol. And immediately, all the violence disappeared. Okay, all the cartels disappeared. Well, the economists will tell you that's because there's no more black market. That you make a peaceful activity illegal, like gambling or whatever, you're going to have a black market, and you're going to have unsavory people, which is what happened with alcohol. It's what's happened with drugs. So instead of having, a prominent business liquor store selling liquor, and high quality liquor, you have a black market with gangsters selling the liquor, and oftentimes corrupted liquor, not high quality. People die from corrupted liquor, just like they die from corrupted drugs. But with drug legalization, you have pharmacies or other reputable businesses selling drugs to drug addicts or drug users. And it's a much more humane system. People, for example, that are injecting heroin into their veins. In the black market, there's a lot of dirty needles that are being transferred back and forth. In a free market, the addict goes to the pharmacy, gets clean needles, so you get rid of all that. But what's important from the standpoint of evil is that what happened here is that people essentially said, they won't admit it, but what they essentially said was that God made a mistake. Okay, he thought that people would exercise their free will in more responsible ways, and he just made a mistake. And so their claim is that God should never have vested man with so much freedom because man has abused the freedom. I don't know how many people use these illicit drugs, but it's got to be a lot, like millions. Because otherwise, why would they need a whole war on drugs to wage? I mean, we all see what it's done. If you only had like 10 people taking drugs, and the irony is that a lot of these people, very devout Christians, are very well intentioned. Okay, but for me, good intentions don't matter one iota. But they'll say, "What about the children, Jacob? What about the children?" And they used to say this 40 years ago. I mean, I started FFF 36 years ago, and I know people that were saying, Jacob, what about the children? What about the children? We got to keep drugs out of the hands of the children. Well, they didn't realize that the children's market is not really a big market. It can't sustain these illegal drug cartels and so forth. It's just the cherry. That what sustains the drug cartels is the illegal adult market. That's where the money is. And then the children are sort of like the cherry on top of the ice cream. But without the adult market, there's not enough money there to sustain these big drug cartels. And so it's actually the drug war that creates the conditions for drugs in the schools and so forth among the children. But what's ironic about this is that 40 years later, the children back then that they were supposedly protecting with the drug war are now the adults, 40, 50 years old. They're the ones taking the drugs because they're waging the drug war because adults are taking drugs. And so to keep these adults from taking drugs, they have the drug war. Well, then that means that their drug war 40 years ago didn't work. Because those children, remember the DARE program? Dare to say no to drugs and just say no to drugs and so forth. Nancy Reagan's just say no and stuff. Well, those children grew up and they became the drug users. But the person that continues to, so you would think 40 years later, the advocate of the drug war from 40 years ago would say, God, Jacob, you were right. This is ridiculous, I mean, they didn't protect the children. The children are now grown up taking drugs. That's why we got to have the drug war. No, they don't. I know these people, though. They still say they're very devout. They're very well intentioned. They'll say, "Oh, I just can't go with drug legalization. The children, Jacob. The children, Jacob." And they're still doing the DARE program. Right near me, there's a parking lot, public parking lot near my house. Not public, but it's part of the neighborhood, where there's a DARE car. A deputy sheriff has a DARE car. So he's just driving a late model of the car that was being driven 40 years ago by the DARE cops. And they go into the schools and repeat the same old stuff. But I guarantee you that 30 years from now, those kids that they're talking to right now will be the ones taking the drugs. Okay, but what they're saying is that God made a mistake. Now, I just can't imagine anything more evil than that. To have a government program that is based on the assumption that God created a mistake, that God committed a mistake when he created man and gave him free will. How can any Christian, devout Christian, genuine Christian, hold such a position? I don't get it. But that is the position, whether they want to acknowledge it or not. That Caesar, which is the organized means of coercion and compulsion, needs to interfere with jail time, with punishment, fines, to ensure that people do not decide the wrong way. Well, God gave them the free will to decide the wrong way. As long as they don't initiate violence or force against another person, God gave them that freedom. But what the state is doing, the federal government or the state governments, what they're doing is saying, well, we're going to correct God's mistake by impeding people's ability through deterrence, by threatening them with fines, coercions, into not making this bad decision. Well, that's not God's way. God's way is let them make the decision. Don't be punishing them. And so you've got this evil system that's been engrafted on to the federal government that is based on the assumption that God made a mistake by vesting man with so much free will. That if he had only known that there would be so many people choosing to take drugs, he never would have done this. And we need to help God by enacting this gigantic, deadly, and destructive program that doesn't accomplish anything. Because there's still people taking drugs, and enough people to justify the continuation of this massive government program. Now, as I said earlier, if you've got evil fruit emanating from a tree, that's a virtual certainty that that's an evil tree. And that's what you have with this drug war. I mean, look at the evil it has produced. I already mentioned all the innocent people that have been killed in Mexico. I mean, they destroyed the country. I grew up there on the border, U.S.-Mexico border, and you in the 50s, you could go into Mexico and have a good time, not worry about violence or anything like that. And my parents even drove to Acapulco, if you can believe that, for their honeymoon. It was just a really nice country. It's been destroyed by the drug war. Nobody in his right mind would dare to drive through Mexico. No American would. Too dangerous because of the drug war. I mean, there's cartel battles and so forth. And remember that it's the drug war itself that has produced the cartels. And then they use the violence of the cartels to justify the continuation of the drug war. It's a perfect racket. Because they are the ones producing their own excuse for having the program and continuing the program. But let's take another example of how evil this government program is. There's the recent drug war killings in the Caribbean, where the Pentagon has been actually just killing people in boats, little tiny boats. I mean, here the Pentagon has these gigantic, destroyers and aircraft carriers and B-52s and so forth. I mean, the national security state. That's where the national security state was concentrated there in the Caribbean to go to war against these little people in these little boats. And they were just shooting them out of the water, killing them. I mean, it would be difficult for me to see anything more evil than that. There's a commandment that says, "Thou shalt not kill." What does it mean? Well, it means what it says. Thou shalt not kill. Yet they were killing these people. And Americans, by and large, are just quiet, very deferential, because this was the Pentagon doing it. This is the national security state, this evil structure that people have come to believe is a necessary part of our federal government. So nobody sits there and questions it. But under our original system of government, you don't go kill people because they're suspected of having committed a crime. Now, it's difficult for me to imagine how a person who is transporting drugs hundreds of miles away can be said to be automatically violating U.S. laws. I mean, that's quite an empire. Its laws extend all the way to international waters and even to the inside other countries. It's like the drug war is everywhere. Except, I'm not sure the U.S. would respond positively if, let's say, China came over to near the United States and started shooting people in little boats for drug law violations of China's drug laws. But I mean, you just don't kill people based on a suspicion. Every judge in the land will tell a jury that an indictment, criminal indictment, which is an accusation, is just that, an accusation. It's not evidence. And yet they were killing people based on the fact that they said they had information. Well, you don't kill people based on information. You kill people after you've accorded them due process. But even like a jury trial, okay, where they can say, hey, I wasn't carrying any drugs, or maybe some of them were forced to be in those boats. We don't know. Maybe they were, like hostages. We don't know. But that's why you don't go just kill people. Thou shalt not kill. And then the fact that there's evidence that they were shooting them in the back. And then there was that other case. It's just horrific. I mean, it just shocks the conscience, where there were survivors and they waited about 30 minutes and then went and blew the survivors to kingdom come. They killed them intentionally, knowing that they had survived. They're hanging on the boat for dear life, or the remnants of the boat. I don't understand how they get away with this. But it's evil. It is the pure essence of evil to be killing somebody who has survived an attack like that. And I think one of the explanations was, well, he might have been in touch with other drug boats in the area. And so what? Okay. Well, they might have gotten more cocaine. Yeah, and so what? I mean, why not just take them into custody? Bring them to the United States. And in fact, they did take 2 or 3 into custody. They didn't even bring them back to the United States. They released them back into South America. I think it was Ecuador, Colombia, or Venezuela, or wherever, where they could start doing the same thing. I mean, it is so shocking. But that's what I'm talking about with respect to evil. Even somebody here in the United States that is suspected of committing a drug offense, you can't kill them. Cops can't kill them. Now, if they start firing at the cops, yeah. But if they're, walking down the street carrying a load of marijuana or cocaine or fentanyl or whatever, they can't kill them. They have to arrest them. That's our system of government. That's morality. Thou shalt not kill. And even if they're convicted, it's not even a death penalty offense. So when you see something evil like this, and remember, people are presumed innocent until they're proven guilty under our system, our original system. Under this system they're using now, they're presuming people guilty. But under our original system, which is based on the moral principle, religious principle, thou shalt not kill, people are presumed innocent. And they have to be treated as innocent until they're proven guilty in a court of law. But even if they're convicted of a drug offense, it's not a death penalty offense under U.S. law. You can send them to jail, but you can't kill them. You can't execute them for possessing or distributing drugs, because it's not a death penalty offense. And yet, you've got more than 100 people that are dead. and there's indication that they might have made a mistake. That these people were just fishing. Some of them were just fishing. And then the fishing industry there was just totally shut down. These are very poor people in that part of the world. You know, you lock them out of their livelihood for a day or two, and they're looking at starvation. There were fishermen that could not go out because some U.S. officials even laughed about it. Like, well, I wouldn't be fishing over there. I don't understand this mindset, but I guarantee you this, that when you see evil like this, thou shalt not kill, that's a strong, strong indication that this is an evil tree. Let me give you another example of this, and that's civil asset forfeiture. Now, there's another commandment. Thou shalt not steal. Period. Thou shalt not steal. That means taking what doesn't belong to you. That's exactly what they're doing with civil asset forfeiture. They find cash in people's car, mostly poor people that like to deal with cash, and they're saying, oh, if it's cash, it's got to be drug money. It's got to be drug money. So we're going to take it. If you don't like it, sue us. Well, poor people can't sue because they don't have any money to hire a lawyer. And they know that. The government knows that. And they're not going to lend them the money that they've stolen. They're just going to say, no, we keep the money. You go find yourself a lawyer. Well, a lot of them can't do that. So the government keeps at least a large percentage of the money, knowing that people can't get their lawyer to get the money back. And many of them are not charged with a crime. They just take the money. They presume that it's drug money. They presume that the person's guilty, which is totally contrary to this principle of presumption of innocence. Well, that's just stealing. They're just stealing people's money. That's evil. When you've got a direct violation of one of God's 10 commandments, thou shalt not kill or thou shalt not steal, that's evil, especially when it's institutionalized. And it is institutionalized because it's part of the drug war. It's helping to win the war on drugs. Well, that's pure nonsense. Hasn't done anything to win the war on drugs. And in fact, every time they enact these tyrannical powers, it's always with the notion of, well, this will help us make great strides in the drug war. Like this extradition of drug lords from Mexico. Oh, this will make great strides. Just recently, they killed another drug lord in Mexico. And the mainstream press, we're making progress here. Stay the course, stay the course. There was one op-ed I read that Claudia Sheinbaum, the president of Mexico, needs to stay the course here. It's ridiculous. They've been doing this for decades, staying the course. And the drug cartels are still there because they can't think. And this involves another system, very destructive, evil system that I'll get to later in this series. But they cannot think. They cannot see that their system, their evil system, is the very cause of what they lament. And the excuse that they use to continue the evil of the system. So you've got these two evil systems that, interestingly enough, have combined. You've got the national security state, you've got the drug war, and they have combined in certain instances, which I find fascinating because now you've got evil that's coalescing. You got two forces of evil, two structural systems of evil that are coalescing. And I haven't even talked about the freedom problem. I mean, you can go to the Future of Freedom Foundation's website. For 36 years, we've been talking about how this system destroys freedom. In a genuinely free society, people have a right to ingest whatever they want to ingest. I don't care how harmful it is. That's the very essence of freedom. At least one essence, one part of freedom, a necessary part. Pure body. You want to ingest something, that's freedom. Alcohol, tobacco, heroin, whatever. So it's a great destroyer of freedom. But then to enforce this thing, they've brought into existence a massive police state, a drug war police state. It's very, very noticeable on the border where I grew up and lived almost half my life. But they've destroyed civil liberties, search and seizure, no-knock raids, pat-down searches. It's a racist wars. I think it's the most racist government program since segregation. the way that it disproportionately falls on blacks. And everybody knows this. And yet they continue it. And they say, well, that we don't intend that, Jacob. It just happens to fall that way. Well, yeah, but you know that. And you keep the government program in existence anyway. Knowing that it's not working anyway. I mean, it's just bizarre. So it's anti-freedom. It's one of the great destroyers of the freedom and well-being of the American people, not to mention the people in Mexico and the rest of South America. Like I said earlier, it's destroyed Mexico. And it continues to destroy Mexico. I mean, look what's going on now after they kill this drug lord. There's huge battles taking place with the members of the drug cartel who are furious. So there's now turf battles between them. They're not going away. And even if they destroy those, there'd be new ones coming in because that's the way it's worked. You know, I've talked in my articles about the series on Netflix called Narcos and Narcos Mexico. If you've never seen it, I mean, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. In fact, back in the 90s, 80s, they were going after a drug cartel leader named Carlos Escobar. I mean, the whole obsession was with Escobar. It's the same way it has been with this guy they just killed. And they finally got Escobar. They killed him. I mean, they were laughing and gleeful. Oh, we made great strides in the drug war. And then you got federal judges today that are saying the same kind of claptrap that they were saying back in the 60s and 70s when they were sentencing people. I know this because I handled drug cases as a lawyer. You know, the federal judges are convinced that they're playing their role in the war on drugs. They don't realize that they're just doing the same thing that federal judges have been doing since the 60s and 70s. But to what avail? You know, they put all these people in jail. Okay, what good's it do? They're just replaced by new ones. That's how a black market works. So, but those are freedom arguments, and they're utilitarian arguments about how deadly and destructive this government program is. That's totally different. Not totally different, but very different from the concept of evil. What I'm saying is that this is an evil. This is where evil has concentrated itself within the national security state system, within the drug war system, and that evil is now coalescing and fortifying itself, and in the process getting devout people to support evil. Thank you for tuning in. Look forward to talking to you in the next part.